Hey everyone, I'm Ashleigh Banfield. This is Drop Dead Serious. Thanks so much for being here. Quick subscribe, please. It's so helpful. I appreciate it. Oh yes, I have new hair today. It may be temporary. I would love to hear what you think. I know that sounds crazy, but whenever I have new hair, I get so many comments. And the last time I was wearing straight hair, people really liked it. So okay, this is just a temporary thing for now, but we'll see, according to what you say. So let me tell you, today is March the 4th, 2026. It is day 32 in the Nancy Guthrie investigation. And I wanted to tell you about something that I've been sort of sitting on for a while. It is this criminal network that's operating in the United States. And they are growing, and they are in every state, including yours. And these guys are real pains in the asses. Typically, they're very burglary, but it doesn't mean that they haven't been violent in the past. And when we look at the Nancy Guthrie story and we cannot figure out what the F happened, I had this long conversation with a retired FBI special agent who had a lot to say about this criminal organization. He also has led the evidence response team in one of the major cities in the United States. So he'll be on in a minute to tell you a little bit about this organization, and then you can compare notes and see if you think that this organization applies to all the things that we've learned about in the Nancy Guthrie case. And then once you hear from him and you learn about this criminal organization, I then have Tracy Walder, who is also retired FBI and also CIA. And by the way, we were both in Afghanistan right around the same time, and we just learned that together, back in the day. We were kind of in the same spot right around the same time. She's going to weigh in on whether she thinks the Guthrie investigation should be thinking more about this group or not. So that's all coming in just a minute. But today, there are a few things to tell you about. Not a lot, though. Not a lot. And here's why I think there's not a lot. For starters, that damn parking enforcement is still up. I talked to Brian Enton today. He said it's still up there, which makes it hell in a handbasket for anybody to do any coverage. Not to say that they're not. In fact, I do have reporting from outside of Nancy Guthrie's home. There was action there today. But of course, as you saw, this massive parking perimeter that goes for blocks and blocks and makes it very, very long, dusty walk through the desert to get to Nancy Guthrie's home. And then, of course, you're stuck there in the middle of the desert in the searing heat, which can go up to around 90, dusty, dry, hot. You don't have power. You don't have shelter. You don't have water. I mean, come on. Sheriff Nanos clearly was trying to, in my opinion, clear us the hell out of there so that we couldn't do the reporting that people have been doing on this story. And I think that, very much the people of Tucson, Arizona have a right to know what the hell happened at that house. Because originally he told us there was nothing to be concerned about. No worries. Nothing to worry about. Right? That is bullshit. And that's why you have reporters to say that is bullshit. And we're here to find out what actually happened because there are other people who live here. Anyway, I digress. Today, the sheriff made a couple of comments about the black gloves. This was sort of a ho-hum to me. The sheriff said those black gloves were traced through DNA. And at the time, we were told didn't match the DNA inside the home and didn't hit into CODIS. But now we're learning that they traced that DNA to a local restaurant employee and that individual is not part of the investigation. So just a little bit more detail about those black gloves that were found 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home. I never held a lot of stock in those gloves. There were like 16 plus gloves on that particular day that the sheriff had reported they'd found in and amongst sort of the rough around Nancy's vicinity of her home. So the sheriff did add this line, kind of a repeat, but lab analysis on other DNA evidence remains ongoing. I think that means IgG, investigative genetic genealogy. I think that they're probably taking that partial sample that they were able to extract from the mixture that they had sent to the Florida lab, whatever mixture that they found of male DNA unknown to anyone in Nancy's immediate circle, familiar circle. And I'm thinking that, you didn't get a CODIS strike on that partial because you can't. You have to give a full sample to CODIS. But investigative genealogy does a lot with a partial sample. It can get you lots of your relatives And then if you check my episode yesterday, it was one of my favorites. Oh my God, it was such a great episode. I learned about the gumshoe detective work that happens once you get the science finished and you get the names of those who match all the family tree, all up to 80 to 100 or so people. And then it's the detectives who just got to hit the pavement and start weeding out all the potential people that connect to the suspect. So yesterday's episode, highly worth checking it out. But I think that's what the sheriff means when he says lab analysis on other DNA evidence remains ongoing. I think they're doing the IgG stuff. And again, I keep going back to this. Sorry if you think I'm a broken record. I apologize, but I do appreciate that you're a repeat customer. Thank you for watching multiple times if you think I'm repeating myself. And I don't think it's crazy to think this. The bite light that the guy had in his mouth, right? You saw him using it. You saw him flashing on the ground as he was trying to find some MacGyver-styled item to, jack with the doorbell cam. You got to put that thing in your mouth. You got to take it out. And usually you use your fingers for that. Yeah? So what's in your mouth? Saliva. What happens when you take something out of your mouth with gloves? Saliva gets on your gloves. What happens with those little fingers of yours afterwards? You touch things like door handles, right? Or sliding doors. Or windows, or, I don't know, maybe that Nest cam and the bracket behind it when you're banging the hell out of it or stealing it in any way that you did. My source said it was smashed. And Michael Ruiz from Fox said that there were glass fragments found below that doorbell cam in the front entrance. So I think that there was DNA inside that house of this guy, thanks to the stupid bite light. But I just think that behind the scenes, it's going to take time. It can take weeks and months to track that genealogical track. But again, yesterday's episode's a good one. Something else that was seen outside of Nancy Guthrie's home today. There was a sign, and here it is. It's like pretty clear. Please do not leave, media, as the Nancy Guthrie abduction will go cold. I do not know who put that there. I don't know if it was another member of the media, but that was sitting there. And so we took a picture from Fox News, and there you have it. Also from Michael Ruiz with Fox, there was a white van that pulled up to Nancy's home again today, and it was another flower delivery. I find that odd. But then apparently another woman came and dropped off more flowers. So it's not a good idea to send flowers, as well-meaning as it may be. There's still a lot going on at that home, and I'm sure that the florists probably feel very uncomfortable. In any case, that's what happened. So not a lot of activity outside the home. But I want to tell you about something that's been kind of gnawing at me. I had this conversation with a guy named Tom McAfee. He's a retired FBI special agent in Atlanta, and he ran the evidence response team, the ERT. And we saw the evidence response team with the FBI at Nancy Guthrie's home, right? We knew that they were there. We knew that they had come to Tucson. So Tom McAfee has a lot of knowledge about all things evidentiary that the FBI deals with, especially the response team. And he told me about SATG. You may think that sounds familiar, and it should. SATG stands for South American Theft Group. South American Theft Group, SATG. And best way for me to explain it is that it's kind of like a bunch of different groups of foreign nationals from South America, usually from South American descent, and often they enter the U.S. legally or illegally, and then often stay a little too long, overstay the visas, and then commit crimes like commercial and residential burglaries. This is kind of their lifeblood, SATG. These gangs of sometimes tourists, right? These are kind of crime tourists. They will come here, they will gather as groups, and they will knock off a bunch of homes. And I've got some specifics about how they typically operate. And when I say typically, you got to work with me here, guys. It's typical. It's not always. There are outliers. There are people who do things a little differently, but might still be within this sort of SATG realm. And typically, they rent vehicles, they use fake IDs, and they use fraudulent documents as they operate. Many of them use multiple burner phones. so that they can communicate, but make it really hard for law enforcement to track them and identify them and certainly find their locations. And they also are big into encrypted messaging. Now, there's lots of you may use encrypted messaging. Nothing wrong with that because, of course, we all feel a little big brothery. But these guys rely on these applications so that they can communicate with each other and no trail, okay? The targets that they usually, fixate on are expensive homes. Now, listen to this part. As I think about Nancy Guthrie's home, this is the description that I get. They often target expensive homes near golf courses, parks, or walking trails because there's better, access and egress points, better known as escape routes. You think about Nancy Guthrie's home, it's not on a golf course, but there are trails back there, and there are what looks like parkland, easy to get in and out, easy, dark. Not a lot of people would see you, easy to surveil as well. They use a lot of internet research to do their dirty work, and they surveil. They use commercially available cameras. They use tracking technology, and they study their potential targets before committing a burglary. And I think about Nancy Guthrie's case because we learned from our sources, not from the sheriff, no thanks to the sheriff, that those two different photographs of the perpetrator, some were video, one was a still shot of the perpetrator on the doorbell cam, one wearing the backpack, one no backpack, that those actually came from different times, different dates. So it lends to the whole casing the joint, surveilling the joint. So that sort of fits into the SATG, modus operandi. They typically break in via back windows, glass doors, often targeting second floor entry points. Nancy Guthrie's home doesn't have a second floor, but it sure as hell has sliding glass doors and back windows. In fact, I think, Lindsay, who was it who told us, a guest told us there were 6 different entry points, I think, into Nancy Guthrie's home. Chris McDonough. So lots of entry points and several of them glass doors and the glass windows as well. So they also primarily target jewelry and designer accessories. And frequently they leave behind other things that are even more expensive, right? So like, wow, there's this amazing flat screen TV, untouched, right? Maybe some beautiful silver, untouched. They're going after specific things because these things are easy to sell. They're easy to fence, right? Get someone else to liquidate it for you. So you got the money, not the goods. So they typically go after jewelry and designer accessories. Now, Nancy Guthrie's 84 years old. I don't think she may be the type to be all into the designer accessories. I mean, it's not a Kardashian sort of situation, right? But somebody who's older may have acquired a lot of jewelry in her life, right? Maybe there's something somebody saw on her at some point and thought that would be easy. Again, she's an elderly woman. I might even be able to get it off her finger. Don't know, but I'm getting to that in just a moment because that's high risk when you're starting to go into occupied dwellings, okay? And SATG, depending on who you talk to, not typically interested in going into occupied dwellings. And I know where you're thinking, and I'm going to go with you there in a moment, but let me continue. Quick note from my sponsor. It is that time of year again, tax time. It's so stressful. Maybe you owe back taxes or you've got unfiled returns, or maybe you pulled money from your 401k and then you got hit with an unexpected bill. No matter the reason, the outcome is the same. The penalties grow, the interest compounds, and you could owe again with no plan in place. The IRS is not waiting. They could enforce collections through wage garnishments or property seizures, but with over 15 years in the business, Tax Network USA has seen it all, and they've resolved over $1 billion in debt, getting taxpayers back on track. And they can do the same for you. And right now, they're offering to make a free investigation call to the IRS for you, after which they'll put a clear plan in place for you. Do not wait for another IRS letter. Call 888-782-2116 or visit tnusa.com/DDS for Drop Dead Serious, or easy, just click the link below. So their operational hubs are typically on the East Coast or the West Coast of the U.S. So again, they've come up from the South American countries, and they've sort of headed to both coasts, but it doesn't mean that they're targeting both coasts. They target every state. There's operations in every state. They just focus on the headquartering and maybe the, dispatch from the west and east coasts. And they use fences, people who will sell the stolen goods that they get in their B&Es and then liquidate it to cash instead of hauling around all these, expensive goods because you're crossing borders. Not smart. So in some cases, a portion of the stolen property is actually sent to Chile or Colombia, meaning they actually do send the goods. That's crazy, but okay. They take the risk and they send them probably via UPS, FedEx, mail, however they decide to send it. But most of the profits from the fencing are actually wired overseas. And they keep some of the money back in the US as well, because like any business, there are expenses, right? If you think about these guys, these are criminal tourists, right? Who've overstayed their visas and they're having to live kind of under the radar a little bit. So they've got rental car expenses, hotel expenses, food expenses, burglary tool expenses. They got to buy their backpacks. They got to buy their hammers and their screwdrivers and anything else they're going to use. Maybe their Wi-Fi jammers. I'm getting to that in a moment as well. But many of them commit the crimes so that they can fund their own lives back in their home countries or the lives of their families, right? So it used to be you came to America to do a good day's honest work and then you'd send a check back home. Oh, okay, well, the honest work went out the window with these guys. They came to America just to fleece us. And they're sending the money home or they're sending the money so that it'll be there when they get home. And of course, if you think about it, a lot of these people are arriving from the United States. And so their home countries actually do a lot of searching. Like there's a lot of heavy searching for, people who arrive back from the United States. I'm from Canada. And every time I came back from the United States, I was always nervous because they want to know if you bought a bunch of US goods and you're bringing it into the country, into Canada, and you're not paying duties. Tariffs, you're not paying, the taxes and so a lot of countries will search people coming from the US. And so because of that, these folks say, hey, not worth it to bring the goods back, not worth it to bring the jewelry back. We'll get caught at our own home border. So we fence it, we get the cash, and then we can either send the cash through wire or maybe, pack it in your luggage. That's also dumb. But they typically send the liquid cash profits home and they don't try to smuggle the goods necessarily over the border. Again, not always, but typically. This is from FBI.gov. I want to read directly. One thing that sets these groups apart from other criminal groups is their brazenness in targeting victims. Rather than trying to fly under the radar, these thieves have deliberately broken into the residence of at least one professional athlete. I'm getting to that in a moment. It's important to note that crimes committed by South American theft groups victimize all types of people, not just professional athletes or wealthy business owners. They also pickpocket shoppers and steal from retail stores. And my guess is they'll hit up any home if they think they can do it successfully. Now, to the successful athlete, I know what you're thinking. I remember Cincinnati Bengals Joe Burrows. He got hit when he was at an away game. You are right. It happened in December of 2024. Joe Burrow was playing in Texas. I don't remember who he was playing, but and these guys bust into his home. There were 3 of them who were charged, burgled his home, right? 2 of them were charged with allegedly moving stolen property against state lines, interstate, right? Interstate commerce. And then one of them was charged with alleged falsification of records in a federal investigation. These guys took allegedly $300,000 worth of stuff. And when I say stuff, kind of fit the MO. Expensive luggage, jewelry, accessories, all from this football player's home. And they believe that these SATG members used fake IDs to do this, rented a vehicle, drove across the state lines to commit the burglary, and then drove back across state lines to Florida, carrying all the stolen items back with them to Florida. And so, this is the fun part, however they got their leads, they executed a search warrant. And this was delicious. The investigators discovered that one of the morons who did this decided to take a selfie, right? Where he was posing with his pals, showing all of the stolen property from Joe Burrow's home. Thank you. Bye-bye. Clink. You know, easy way to catch a guy who's stupid enough to take these pictures. Look at me with all my booty. You may have heard of something even more recent, because during the Nancy Guthrie investigation from February 1st, the first day that she was reported missing, through the entire month of February, this has been like a top news story. And on the 24th of February, there was a big report, and I've got information from ABC 13 in Houston, that 60 plus burglaries were reported in the Houston area. 20 people were arrested. And wouldn't you know, South American burglary ring, they recovered $4 million of stolen property. But yeah, you probably heard about it. 60 properties all in one fell swoop. Like, talk about a cluster. And this is how ABC 13 reported it.
7 break-ins in West University Place and more than 60 across the Houston area. Investigators say this man, Patricio Munoz, was one of the major players behind the Chilean burglary ring responsible. January 28th, he and his wife, Tanya Barra, were arrested by HPD's West Side Crime Suppression Team. Together, investigators say Munoz and Barra were funding and directing many of the break-ins. Munoz allegedly selling these jamming devices to a separate Colombian burglary ring. They're used to disrupt home security systems.
They have multiple antennas and radios built into them.
Nigel Nielsen owns the IT firm Ideal Tech. He's familiar with the jamming devices, illegal to own under federal law.
It's sending out a really strong signal to overwhelm the signal of your security cameras, your alarm systems, your cell phones.
What about police radios? Could it interfere with that?
I would suspect so.
Westview police say they found a jamming device on this Chilean burglary suspect during a break-in last year. Altogether, Houston police say they've arrested 20 members of the burglary ring and recovered $4 million worth of stolen property. It's the same crime ring linked to break-ins at the homes of professional athletes in Ohio, Wisconsin, and Kansas. Munoz was previously charged and sentenced in Los Angeles for the 2022 break-in of then Congresswoman Karen Bass's home.
Where's your country of origin, man?
Chile.
Munoz and his wife were booked into the Harris County Jail last month on charges of tampering with government records. Munoz allegedly caught with a fake Mexican passport and fraudulent car title. His wife, investigators say, had used a fake Argentinian ID to rent an apartment. Days later, Munoz was charged in connection with the October 4th break-in of a home in this gated Royal Oaks neighborhood. Investigators say he broke in through a window after jumping a fence, then pried open a safe and stole 4 watches, each worth thousands of dollars. When police searched his apartment, they say they found watches, jewelry, and other pricey items. In his child's bedroom, pry bars, and a jamming device, potentially damning evidence in a series of crimes spanning across the Houston area and perhaps the country. Luke Jones, ABC 13, Eyewitness News.
Jamming devices. Did you hear that? Jamming devices. Jamming devices. Because in one of the episodes, I think it's 2 or 3 episodes ago, we were questioning what was in the pocket of the suspect who's seen on the doorbell cam. To me, it looked like the edge of an iPhone. But when I talked to Maureen O'Connell, right, retired FBI special agent, she knows her stuff, she said, oh, no, that looks like a radio of some kind, like maybe a walkie-talkie or maybe a jamming device, right? Maybe a jamming device. Because, and Maureen explained this best, if you're going to commit a burglary, you're not going to go with your iPhone hanging half out. And typically your front pocket will fit your iPhone, but it may not fit something bigger like a radio, like a walkie-talkie, or maybe a jamming device, because it does kind of look like it might be one of those antennae. Super interesting, though, if I do say so. So I wanted to talk to somebody who knows a lot more about SATG than I do. And Tom McAfee spent decades with the FBI. Okay, not only as a special agent, he's retired now, but he also was the head of the evidence response team in Atlanta, where he's from. And I had loads of questions about SATG, but here's the catch. Tom did not want to discuss the Nancy Guthrie investigation because he feels like it's still, being investigated. So he was happy to discuss SATG. Just don't freak out if you don't see me jumping right in and demanding that he answer something about the Nancy Guthrie investigation. But fear not, because I've also had a very long conversation with Tracy Walder. And Tracy is a former CIA officer and FBI special agent, years and years and years in law enforcement. And she absolutely can see both the benefits and the pitfalls to the idea that the crime against Nancy Guthrie may have been committed by the SATG criminal enterprise. So here first is my conversation with Tom McAfee. Tom, talk to me a little bit about SATG and what their MO really is.
Sure. This SATG, or South American Theft Group, is a loosely organized crime group that originates out of places like Colombia, Chile, Peru, Ecuador, Venezuela. These are typically non-U.S. citizens that come here on either through a visa waiver program or tourist visa. They overstay, sometimes just illegal immigrants. And basically what they do is they get into various jobs, typically manual labor, but they end up doing surveillance on residences that are in typically very nice developments. And they target primarily Indian, Asian families, where they'll do extensive surveillance of a residence. And then when they go to break in, they typically go in when no one's home. They use technical devices to defeat security systems.
Jammers?
And they target those places specifically because those families are known to carry and maintain large amounts of cash, jewelry, precious metals in their home.
But you were mentioning they thwart security systems like with jammers?
Yes, these jammers, again, very sophisticated techniques where they do surveillance and counter surveillance within neighborhoods. Typically looking at some of these houses that are maybe abutting a golf course, so they'll use some of the public fairways or thoroughfares behind the golf course to go set up surveillance on the backside of a house.
And I know you can't address the Nancy Guthrie issue at all, but I've been curious about something I've seen in his pocket, which to me looks like an iPhone sticking out or maybe a walkie-talkie, and I keep wondering if it's maybe one of these jammers, but I've never seen them. But you said something very interesting. You said that they often take jobs, like as manual labor, maybe landscapers. I'm just wondering if that could have been something that applies to the current case that I'm looking at, because that's an easy way to surveil somebody working on the property.
Yeah, I have no indication or information about that. But again, typically they might work in a neighborhood capacity, yard, landscape, things like that.
But jobs that someone who isn't legal could actually do, because obviously they're here on expired tourist visas or some other kind of visa that they've overstayed.
It's under the table type stuff.
Yeah. Well, that makes a little bit more sense, though. But I also noticed in our earlier discussions that you mentioned many of them are really highly trained, like paramilitary or even maybe former police.
Yeah, that doesn't go across the board, but there are instances of many having paramilitary or law enforcement backgrounds that come up here and conduct the activities.
Yeah. And again, I know you can't comment on that, but when I think of that, I think that doesn't look like the guy who I saw on the doorbell cam at Nancy Guthrie's house, because he looked like a bungling fool. He certainly didn't look like he knew what he was doing or had a plan in place. He looked like he was searching around for a plan as he was going. But and like you said, it's not across the board, so there can be discrepancies in these types. You mentioned that they typically, target Indian and Chinese because of the high number of cash and jewelry that typically these folks might have. But, do they also just typically target high-end homes and they may not know what's inside?
Yes, it's affluent neighborhoods. Here in Georgia, there have been a number of SATG break-ins and arrests, upwards of $600,000 worth of material being stolen from one particular residence. It's very common. Well,
there was this big Houston cluster too. 60 burglaries in Houston, Texas a couple weeks ago?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. And then the brazenness. I think about the brazenness again. I think of everything right now as with the prism of Nancy Guthrie's case, but the brazenness of SATG is that they'll go into homes like of Joe Burrows of the Cincinnati Bengals. I mean, the risk factor is huge, and it didn't seem to matter. Talk about the risk factor when it comes to SATG folks.
Well, again, typically the targeted residents are not known to have firearms, not known to do a lot beyond just technical surveillance or technical, burglar alarms, things like that. Some of the NFL players, I know that's been very extensive, and I know the NFL is doing a good job teaching their players about these sorts of thefts when they travel, because they're gone for a long time, and it kind of makes a unique opportunity for them. So it does go to hiring a house sitter or something like that to watch some of their stuff. But that was very recent. The three out of Cincinnati broke into that house, or
I
eventually.
honestly I would have always assumed that some high rolling NFLers got some kind of person back at the home when he travels. They got a lot of money and they could have house managers or staff of some kind. So I was really surprised that they would take that much of a risk. But what about the surveillance? Like, what kind of surveillance does SATG, network folks typically employ?
It's typically physical surveillance. So that means someone's there looking. In a neighborhood near where I live, there are walking paths, and so they'll park in one area and walk through the neighborhood, basically through a circuitous route, to be able to go through the neighborhood and get into the forests that are behind these houses, and they'll set up back there and just watch for a while.
What's the ideal strike time, or is it all over the map?
I think it all depends on the victim. We've had some that happen in the mid afternoons, and then a lot were in the evening, and some in the morning. It just depends.
And when you say morning, do you mean like overnight, the early morning hours? Yeah,
correct.
Yeah.
And the local sheriff's office here, Forsyth County, has done a fantastic job responding to these break-ins. The classic neighborhood watch. Somebody sees something and they're calling it in, and Forsyth County Sheriff's Office is on it immediately. And they bring K9 tracks, aerial assets, things like that. It's very overwhelming to find that person.
But the typical MO of someone with SATG, they don't expect someone's going to be home, correct? Like they're not home invaders. They're home burglars mostly, correct?
Correct. Yeah, that's back in the day, a long time ago, there used to be more of the home invasion type. That's kind of changed because the penalties for armed home invasions are a lot different than just a B&E, break and entry type situation. So they've kind of evolved their tactics in that regard.
But how? I mean, other than just straight surveillance, do they employ tactics outside the house, say late at night, to make noise, to see if a light goes on? That's the typical, Hollywood way that you find out someone's home in the middle of the night. But what kind of tactics would they use to make sure before they go in that no one's home?
I haven't seen anything like that where they're, making noise to see if there's a dog or anything like that. Again, they're not quick, right? They are slow and they are patient. So going and watching is what they do, and they build up travel patterns and work patterns and things like that. So I haven't seen anything like that where they, push, or try to, we call tickle the wire kind of thing to get something going.
Tickle the wire. Is that what you mean by, sort of?
It's an old FBI term for other stuff, but that's what, defaults to that.
Try to prod and see if maybe there's some reaction inside. I would imagine you'd want to know something before you're going to go into someone's home who could have a weapon.
Right? If they did that and they got caught, now you're out of you're maybe out of status, things like that, and then they'll have other problems.
So, are there other ways that you mentioned the jammers that they might bring to thwart a home security system, but do they do other things that are just physical and hands-on, like grabbing cameras off their mounts, taking the cameras with them, or smashing, spotlights?
We haven't really seen that much activity where they're destroying the cameras. There's a lot of commercially available jammers that are out there. There's been on Joe Rogan's show and Sean Ryan's shows, things like that, where they talk about these different jammers that are out there. And so I really can't talk to their techniques with respect to some of those cameras. Most of the stuff that we've seen, it's just been they go in when no one's there. Now, there have been some Ring cameras that actually led to a police response, but a lot of them don't have that.
And are they typically masked? And I only ask that because if your jammer doesn't work and you're on camera, because most people have doorbell cams now, have they figured out a way to get around that with these, big ski masks?
A lot of folks will have masks, and again, that goes part to like when you get apprehended, you'll have these tools, burglary tools, which would be a mask, a hammer, things like that to break windows or whatever.
So to that end, do they usually have a kit in a backpack or something with
Yeah,
them that?
they'll bring tools with them. Absolutely.
So talk to me about that. What kind of kits do you know of?
That's the classic beanie tools: screwdrivers, hammers, things like that, wire cutters, all sorts of stuff. I mean, they're not. When I say they're sophisticated, there's a lot of really sophisticated jewelry thieves out there, that break in after hours to places and do techniques like that. Some of these guys are like that. A lot of them are not. They're opportunists. They can break a window, they can break a door, and get in.
Do they typically carry backpacks?
Many of the ones I've worked with and worked on, I should say, have bags and tools. Yes.
How often does a member of SATG or its ilk actually injure someone in the home, or worse, kill them, or after that remove the person or the body?
I can't really speak to that. I mean, there was one several years ago, an armed home invasion. My best recollection, but nothing recently. Again, they've evolved their tactics to try and minimize the crime that they're facing.
So they typically do not want to injure or harm or kill or steal a body. That's not what they do. But are there examples
contact.
of that? What's that?
They try to avoid contact.
But do you know if in their background there are examples of them doing these things?
Nothing initially to me, stands out. Sorry.
No, that's okay. You mentioned to me last weekend that there is evidence of that. There is evidence of them killing and taking bodies before, but is that
not taking the body? But there was one where it was a violent break-in, an armed home invasion. That was years ago. That was like a crew out of Detroit, I believe.
Are the SATG members typically armed?
Some are. Again, what do you consider armed? Someone coming at me with a hammer, I consider armed. So, those are, whether they're carrying firearms, I can't say to all the groups. Again, there's no, one particular set, right? Some of these groups have more violent members than others, and they might have different tactics and techniques that they use.
And what's the proliferation like of SATG across the country?
It's fairly extensive. He's everywhere from East Coast to West Coast. Kind of travels up into the Northwest. It's pervasive, and they travel.
No
right?
states are immune.
Just because they're live in one place doesn't mean they don't go to another state to do it. And that's where the federal nexus comes in. Right?
Do they leave a kind of calling card behind? Is it obvious when you see these SATG operations?
No, that's more of a investigative steps that we end up doing. The investigation portion, which I really don't want to get into, how we find out who they are. But that's how we end up finding them, through some of our techniques that we have.
Right. Do you think?
But again, that's where we get the federal nexus, is when they're traveling between state lines or taking stolen property over state lines. It's interstate transportation of stolen property. Right.
Do you think that SATG is satisfied with its fairly nonviolent get in, get out, just get the jewels and go MO? Or do you think they may be stepping up their game at some point in certain places with certain factions?
These guys can make a significant amount of money. And if they hit, I don't know, you can speculate on different motives for these folks to do stuff, but they can do very well. And again, what they steal, they typically have to go through a pond or a fence to get rid of it.
Given how much we now know about SATG, are we making good inroads to thwart or bring to a halt their operations?
I don't think you can bring it to a halt. I think the FBI has done a fantastic job tracking this down. Again, working with local authorities like Forsyth County Sheriff's Office, Atlanta PD, places like that. We've stopped numerous crews like this. It's just a classic break-in strategy, so it's going to be difficult. But the Bureau has resources and expertise in this area.
Tom McAfee, it's great of you to talk to me. Thank you so much. I've learned so much about this organization, and it's jarring to say the least, but I appreciate everything you've done and what you've said for us.
Happy to help.
My great thanks to Tom McAfee. Guy knows what he's talking about. He's obviously got a lot of experience with SATG, but now I wanted to see how it applied to the evidence thus far that we know of in the Nancy Guthrie investigation. And for that, I turned to Tracy Walder, again, former CIA officer and FBI special agent. And she knows a thing or two about why this may or may not be SATG. Have a look. Hey, quick note from my sponsor. I used to work with a guy who shall remain unnamed, who was completely white-haired from like the age of about 19. I think you might be able to guess. But here's the thing. Most of us assume that gray hair is genetic, but only about 30% actually is. The rest of it comes down to what you're eating, your nutrition, your stress, how you care for your hair and your scalp. And that, my friends, is where Array comes in. It's clinically proven to slow gray hair growth, support repigmentation, and promote thicker, fuller hair in as little as 3 to 6 months with consistent use. So yay! We spend so much time and money on our skin. Like, I don't want to have an aging face. And it's true that the scalp actually ages 6 times faster. And Array is like skincare for your hair. Most people just cover their gray, but you can actually slow it. You can slow the progression. And for a limited time, our listeners, that means you're getting 15% off at array.com with the code Banfield. So AREY.com, use the code Banfield. And after your purchase, tell them I sent you. It really helps. So Tracy, I'm fascinated by the whole notion of how SATG operates, but I'm trying to wrap my head around how it might apply to the Nancy Guthrie case. Do you think that they've thought through a lot of the possibilities of SATG?
I mean, honestly, Ashleigh, I would hope so, right? Because they have to essentially game out every situation, right? Cartels, single one-offs, stalkers, all of it, they have to game out. So I would hope that this has come across their minds. I mean, SATG does exist in Arizona. They have done things in Arizona. So it wouldn't, I don't want to say it wouldn't be a surprise, because it would be, but I don't think it's that off base, right, for them to at least examine this particular lead.
Well, what I think the biggest barrier to me thinking it might be a SATG operation is that it doesn't appear that anything was stolen except a person. And SATG is not in the business of taking people for ransom that I know of.
You're 100% right. So this group, they've done robberies in California, Pennsylvania, Arizona, really all over. And, it's crime tourism, if you will. And so this group typically only operates between 4 p.m. and 10 p.m. Like, they have a window that they operate, which is so interesting. And they're in small, kind of fluid teams. And they're not, a robbery is violent, right? But they're not violent in the sense that they are wounding people and taking people. Their whole goal is for unoccupied homes. That is why they spend so much time and effort on surveillance, very intricate surveillance. And so it just doesn't jive here with what happened, because this is essentially violent, right? You're taking someone is violent.
So Tom McAfee mentioned that they will also often operate in the middle of the night, which sounds a lot like the Nancy Guthrie case.
Yeah, listen, just because I said 4 to 10, that's just what probabilities,
typical,
right? Like, so you're just looking at the whole of what they have done. It's not to say that there haven't been ones, but if they're operating in the middle of the night, it is because someone isn't home then. That is really what their MO is. It's not that they haven't ever done that before. And there have been times where people have been home, and you know what? They actually tend to leave because they want to be able to go back. Right? And they are taking advantage of that visa waiver program. And so they want to go back and sell those goods that they have on the black market. That is the whole point of why they're doing what they're doing.
And they don't like the elevated risk of going into an occupied home.
Correct. It brings, you're 100% right. It brings in so much risk, right? You have a risk now of potentially being violent. You are now, if you're caught, adding additional charges to that, right? If you're violent.
Yeah, but you know what I keep thinking about, Tracy, and I think a lot of people miss this. In an early New York Times article, a reporter interviewed a friend of Nancy Guthrie's who said that she's recently started using these high-powered hearing aids. And that makes me wonder if anybody who's testing the waters outside to see if anybody is inside would think no one's inside, because at night you take those hearing aids out and she might not hear any rustling outside or, say, breaking of spotlights or cameras or anything like that.
I agree with you. I think actually my only like pushback to that would be because this group, from what I know about them and all the different cases that I've looked at about them, is the amount of surveillance that they do in advance. And so they would, in my opinion, have understood her pattern of life, right? And they would have had a reasonable expectation to know she would have been home and would have been asleep if they had been conducting that very thorough survey. I mean, they'll pose as dog walkers, delivery drivers, Uber driver, all of those things. And so if it is this group, I don't feel they would have made that mistake because of the careful surveillance that they do.
Is it possible, and again, because I think the FBI and perhaps the sheriff as well is gaming out as many scenarios as possible, is it possible that in one of the earlier, alleged surveillance runs, they may have taken out lights, or they may have done things late at night that made them think her pattern is that no one's there at night because there's no response, there's no light that comes on when there's a loud noise outside?
You're right. Motion detectors, right? All of those kinds of things. So I think that's an entirely possible situation, because they have to game all of these out. That is good police work, right? That's good investigatory skills. And so they have to game all of this out. So they absolutely could have done something like that. And I agree with you. I don't think she knew someone had broken into her home. And I do think, even though she wasn't recording, right, they weren't recording to the cloud, she was probably getting alerts, right, on her phone when, wildlife was on her camera. And I think she would have slept through those, right, because her phone would have been on silent. And so I 100%.
Well, even if it weren't, right? Even if it weren't,
You're right.
She wears these hearing aids that are very powerful. And so, listen, my mom has these not so powerful hearing aids. And at night, she can't hear very well at all. I don't think she'd hear me rustling around.
100%. I completely agree with you. And they absolutely could have altered the scene. And because everything was so still, right, and quiet and dark, this is a very dark area, they 100%, I think it's not outside the realm of possibility. I'm just giving a typical situation that I would have thought, based on this activity of this group, that they would have done thorough surveillance, let's put it that way.
Yeah, and listen, we're getting a lot of mixed messages about the two images, one with the backpack, one without the backpack, being on different days. And if you ask the sheriff, apparently we're all crazy. But if you ask every reporter's sources, who a lot of them are extraordinary, absolutely, they're from different days. So it appears that there may have been some surveillance.
100%.
And yet, with surveillance, it sure doesn't look like the guy approaching the camera had been there before or knew what to do. Sort of seems surprised by the camera and was looking for a MacGyver way of handling it.
You're right. And then that brings into question. I completely agree with you. Listen, Ashley, I feel that this is two different people. And I totally get that we're getting mixed messages.
You do.
I do.
You think it's two different people?
I do, because I think it looks similar and they're wearing similar clothes. But I've always said before, what's going to be critical in this case, in my opinion, is how they got her out, right? Because she's not mobile, right? There's a lot that goes into it. So you're not walking blocks, miles away, right, with a person. Someone is there in a vehicle somewhere around. Obviously not like right up to the house, but somewhere around. And so part of me wonders if it's not the same person, because to your point, I do not understand the whole weed situation or whatever that plant was, right, that they were putting up on the...
I have my theory. I don't think they're trying to cover the camera at all. Well, I think if you look at his fists, I think he's trying to loop that vine and yank the camera off from its bracket. That's what, and look at it next time and see if that's what you see when you see how his fists are. Yeah.
And you know what? I never looked at that. I'm going to go back now and rewatch it. But I think I don't, based on how inexperienced both of them see, because if you're conducting surveillance, if this is a different person on that day, which I really think is that January day where they told everyone to get the footage, he would have never come in the camera view. If you're that sophisticated, why are you coming that close, right, to the ring doorbell, excuse me? And I just think this group wouldn't have done, they're not perfect, but wouldn't have made a mistake like that. So, because now you have two images of this person.
But here's my pushback on this being two people. They're the Bobbsey twins, the way they're dressed.
Yes.
And it would be very significant to see these mass purchases of matching items, because it's pretty hard to get all that on the black market, secondary market, eBay, Etsy, or wherever else they shop. They have exactly the same outfits on, almost head to toe, except for those shoes, which I think are different.
I think they just shared an outfit. I think their build might be similar. And listen, it could be just one person. I truly don't know. I am 100% guessing at this point, right?
Yeah.
Just based on what I'm seeing. But I would think that someone, if it was the same person, we always in the FBI talk about the fatal funnel, right? Like, you don't want to be in the dangerous parts of a situation. And so to stand right in front of that door for that long, messing with the security camera, doing what you're doing. We don't know how long they were there total, but it was a long time in the clip that we saw. That's a weird thing to do. And that's a very vulnerable thing to do. And if this person had seen the house before, I don't know why they would do that. You would get in, get out, go home, right? That's how that would work.
I'm still not 100% convinced they were in for 40 some odd minutes, just what everybody says from the initial, images on the camera. Well, we don't know if those are the initial, but my thought is that they've been mucking about trying to find as many cameras outside and obviously spotlights to smash, and may have been inside for a much shorter period of time. But just let's go back to the SATG hallmarks. They often enter, and again, this is generally not always, but they often enter through back windows or glass doors, usually looking for jewelry or designer accessories. Now, an 84-year-old woman's not going to have a lot of designer accessories necessarily, but she did have $1 million home.
Yes.
And if you think of it, very easy target, even if you are going to up the risk and go in the middle of the night. Pretty easy target that an 84-year-old woman, A, might not hear you, or B, would be paralyzed with fear and certainly wouldn't fight back.
You're right. It's a very easy target, and it's also a very similar target. They tend to target higher end homes, right? So multi-million-dollar homes. This is not a neighborhood they wouldn't target. I know that sounds terrible, but it's within their MOs. Like we said, they're generalizations of who they are. But yes, they typically enter through rear doors, windows, those kinds of things. So this person came in, well, we think came in the front door based on that camera and what we see on the crime scene. And so that is, in my opinion, a little bit different. But yes, you're right. To that point, if they're targeting a home where you have a couple our ages, right, in it, they are more likely to be a threat to you, right, if you enter their home, just because we're a bit more able-bodied. They may have viewed an 84-year-old woman as just a non-threat and a non-issue. But, and I think it was you who mentioned this, if you're going to rob a home, if that's your sole purpose, you're not going to take someone with you. That really sort of bogs you down. And so that's where that differs, I guess, a little bit.
So I asked about that, and because I agree, if you're going to rob the home and you're going to take the person, you're going to take something for your effort as well as the person. And that the SATG organization isn't known for maiming, hurting, killing, or even being armed a lot of times, but that it has happened, that it is certainly not outside of the reality for SATG to injure or maim or even take someone with them.
It's not. I don't want to share too much because it's someone I know personally whose parent was the victim of this. Also lived in a very high-end neighborhood in a state that they target quite a bit. And she did have a weapon pulled on her. The mom actually was home. They did enter through a back window, though. And what's interesting is the mom wasn't supposed to be home, though. She wasn't supposed to be home on that day at that time. But it is something they've done. I know that firsthand. So once they saw her, they actually left with nothing. So it's not to say that they've never done that. They absolutely have. I know that just personally. But they didn't attempt to harm her. They seemed to be more concerned, we might get caught. We're going to go ahead and leave. And that's what they did.
Well, the other thing is I wonder if, of course, we think about all the different scenarios. And one of the reasons that somebody might do something completely out of the ordinary, and that is take the victim with you, alive or dead, is that they may have, engaged and shot the victim. And now the forensics are in the victim. Therefore, you are leaving your calling card behind in the way of a bullet and must take the victim. Is that something you think that is plausible or far-fetched? I mean, again, she's 84. You don't need to shoot, but it's dark and you don't know maybe who it is.
Nothing is outside of the realm of possibility, right? We don't want to just dismiss things. I think that they have probably already gamed out that situation. And I do think that at this point, they would have said that there was enough forensic evidence at the scene to determine that it's not compatible with life, right, of the victim. But maybe they're holding on.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but now that you mention it, I think they actually might have mentioned that there wasn't a discharge of a weapon in the home.
Yes.
So that's out. That whole idea is out.
I think that's out because they would have, I think that was mentioned, but I couldn't remember, so I didn't want to bring it up. But I think that they would have been testing for GSR, right? They would have been testing for all of those things, and that would have come back, especially if it was a close shot or something like that. It would have been on the bed, wherever something like that would have happened.
So the only other forensics that the suspect could leave behind would be if he bled on her, or if, the bite light somehow came out of his mouth and she was there and maybe it hit her or some other reason. It's an awfully long way to go to protect yourself from a little bit of your DNA being on the victim. You could just take whatever it is she's wearing and force her into the shower rather than taking a woman that age that is going to be a burden and probably might not survive it.
Yes, I mean, essentially viewing that person, right, as evidence that you need to conceal, that's rare. And what tends to happen is that person, I'm trying to say this in a sensitive way, is disposed of close to the crime scene. Because the more you have to take that person away, the more steps you're leaving, the more potential for evidence, right? All of those things become a huge problem. And I think because she didn't really put up much of a fight, I really don't think that she did. This is different than like in the Idaho case, right? Where forensic evidence was found because those girls and male put up a fight, right? They're young and they put up a fight. And I think that's part of the reason we are not seeing a lot of fruitful forensic evidence coming out of that home. And I also think too, in the case of, this gang, I just don't think they would go that far to destroy the evidence like that.
Also, when a SATG strike happens, is it usually in a cluster? I'm thinking about this one that was just, a week or so ago, like on the 24th, and it was in Houston, 60 plus burglaries. So it's either hers was the first home and it went terribly awry and they abandoned the rest of the plan, or they just chose one home in a really difficult place to get to, which seems implausible.
So you're absolutely right. They do tend to occur in clusters of time. So sometimes we'll go months, even years, right, without an attack, right, or a target by them. And then we'll see just dozens of clusters, dozens of homes being hit. I don't know, there was a cluster, I'm sure you remember this, of a lot of athlete homes, right, being...
Joe Burrows.
Right, but lots of different, they were all, even one down the street from me in Texas, the same thing, they were all hit in these clusters. And that tends to be how they work because of their tourist visa, right? That is why they are in these clusters. And so to have just this one-off, right, and then we haven't heard of anything, at least I have not heard of anything from Pima County in terms of these robberies and clusters. Maybe you have, I have not. I don't see any clustering at all in this case. It's just a singular kind of one-off.
Last question, and, if this is SATG, and I see a lot of reasons why it may not be, these people typically leave. Again, they're here, they're overstayed, and eventually they want to get home with whatever bounty they were able to effectuate in the U.S., whether they fenced it and wired it or not. How much more difficult would that make it to find this person now that we're likely on an IGG, an investigative genetic genealogy track, if they're not here?
It would be difficult, but, and I've said this before in terms of this investigation, I do think that because of the proximity to Mexico, there's no question that they've utilized Interpol in terms of submitting all of that. And so I do think if they're able to get at least a partial, they could probably try to marry it up with Interpol. It's going to make it a lot more difficult, 100%. But I do believe that they have submitted some of that to Interpol. There's no question, just simply because of the proximity.
So what's your gut that when it comes to SATG, hard stop, not a chance, or hey, anything's possible?
Listen, I never want to say hard stop, right? I don't think that's ever fair in a case like this. I just feel based on what I know and what I followed of them, this doesn't seem to pattern who they are. But, again, anything is possible. My gut tells me that this isn't them based on the patterns of their behavior.
Tracy Walder, I love talking to you. I wish I had your brain. Thank you for doing this.
Well, likewise, Ashleigh, thank you for having me.
And so that's where things stand. Here we are, day 32, March the 4th. Coming towards the end of week 5. And I will say it again. I think this crime is going to be solved. I do. I really do. I think there's so much going on behind the scenes that we don't know about, like in Coburger. You remember we thought, oh, these bungling idiots in Moscow and the PD, they don't know what they're doing. It's just some car and that's all they've got. No, they had a lot more. And it just took time. The IGG, the familial connections that they were able to get from that speck of DNA that was on the knife sheath that idiot Brian Koberger left behind at the crime scene, it just took time to find his giant web of family, 4th, 3rd, 2nd cousins, grandfather, grandmother, aunts, uncles, siblings, parents, you name it. They got that wide group of people. And it just took time to figure out who in that giant group might be the perp, right? And they did it. But it takes the gumshoe work. Again, yesterday's episode, it takes the gumshoe work of going through that with detectives who hit the pavement and literally go asking and collecting and seeking and then, cutting the weed away from the chaff. And that's how they eventually get to their guy. That is what might be going on as we speak at this moment. And God, I hope so. Because again, whoever that glove-fisted prick is who did this, he spat on his damn fingers. He did, with that bite light. He did. And those fingers touched something, a lot of things, at Nancy Guthrie's home. And God, I hope they did a better CSI than they did in those first 24 hours. Because that DNA is in that home. And if they've got it, it's just a matter of finding all his relatives and eventually finding him. And to that end, if you know anything, if you know somebody who behaved in a weird way, just wasn't themselves, February 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, whenever, behaved weird when that video came out, like all of a sudden, they missed work, no good explanation, behavior change. If you know people like that who fit maybe this description, 1-800-CALL-FBI. If you know anything, 1-800-CALL-FBI. There is $1 million waiting for you to help solve the Nancy Guthrie case. And maybe you can be the one that really puts this to an end. Find justice for the Guthrie family. Find justice for Nancy Guthrie. And hopefully let's find Nancy. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, the truth isn't just serious. It's drop dead serious.